Well, I'll weigh in with some of my thoughts on this article and some of my work, and I think for me, some of the surprising ways that this article forced me to reconsider the cosmopolitanism that I in many ways took for granted in the poetry that I work on. I work on poetry in Spain to get away from that nationally rigid concept of the source of a poem. I would say I work on poetry in Spain, not Spanish poetry, because it's written by a lot of people from Chile and Mexico and Argentina and Spain itself, and they're in contact with lots of other poets. So the poetry I work on is written in Spain, but it is not necessarily Spanish. These poets always consider themselves cosmopolitans. What they think that means might vary from one poet to the next, and the way they express that cosmopolitanism also varies. But one of the first and most important things for their poetry is avant-garde painting, cubism in Paris. And when I was reading Jahan's article and thinking about the embodied cosmopolitanism that he locates in these poems, that local, specific, personal cosmopolitanism, it really made me kind of feel a little uneasy about the kind of cosmopolitanism that I was finding in the poets that I read and kind of taking at face value as a cosmopolitan thing. And it made me think of some of their sources, like Cubism, as I said. And this is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, that's Picasso's painting from 1907, which is kind of foundational for Cubism. I'm not the first one to say that it might be, in at least what Picasso himself and many others have said, its use of African masks as kind of avenues for exploration of form. It might be appropriative, it might be racist, right? All these things. So we already see that concern in this work. This feeling that, okay, a certain kind of avant-garde cosmopolitanism imagines itself to be cosmopolitan, when what it's really doing is just appropriating and in a really reductive way, cultural artifacts from elsewhere, right? And always considering them from elsewhere. Not really engaging on that personal, embodied level that I think Jahan really suggestively and lucidly discusses in his article. And then there's also, the poets that I work on are called ultraistas, and so one of their main magazines is called Ultra. And as you can see there, this is a woodcut by a guy named Władysław Jal, who's a Polish artist, but he's in Madrid at this time. And it's got electric lighting on the road and the car. So for a lot of these poets, cosmopolitanism means cars, planes, electricity. That's all you need. Those are the ingredients for cosmopolitanism. And so maybe that's a little bit too simple for the kind of really embodied, personal, local, and specific felt sympathies that Jahan was developing. Sometimes I feel I take these poets too much at face value and say, oh yeah, it's cosmopolitan, it's an airplane, sure, good enough. Maybe it's not. The avant-garde that I work on in Spain also extends to other places. This is the cover of a book it's a one long poem in 5 sections by a poet named Manuel Megs, he's Mexican. It's called Urbe, big city. It's Urbe, super poema bolchevique in 5 cantos. It's Urbe, city, super Bolshevik poem in 5 cantos. So for Maple Sarate, cosmopolitanism is the Russian Revolution. That's new, that's distant, that's cool, right? This city, he's got woodcuts by Jean Charlot in there. Some of them are like big, bright lights. Some of them are ocean liners. Some of them they're cities. There are no people, right? So reading Jahan's article made me really question this kind of cosmopolitanism. There's no human connection. And it made me question some of my own thinking on a lot of the work that I've seen in the past. So I've got a couple poems that I'll pass around. I'm not sure if I've got more copies for everybody, but maybe. I wonder what all of you will think about. Oh, and you guys, I need to have a couple here. Actually, I'll project it too. Because these poems are poems that they kind of straddle this kind of this divide of cosmopolitanism that I imagined before. And I'm discovering that it's almost flipped for me now. So, Annie, this is Guillaume Apollinaire. This is right before the First World War. I wrote on this poem a few years ago in my dissertation, and I wrote, well, this is just play with metaphor. He's not kind of working on any great truth. This is Donald Ravel's translation. You can see right there. He's not working on any great truth. He's playing with metaphor here, or maybe it's not even quite metaphor. It's this like hovering analogical kind of link. So he says, Annie, on the coast of Texas, between Mobile and Galveston, there is a big garden filled with roses. There is also a mansion. It is one big rose. A woman walks there often, alone in the garden. When I cross the lime tree road, we are face to face. Because she is a Mennonite, her roses and her clothing have no buttons. My jacket is missing 2 buttons. The lady and I are almost one religion. So in my dissertation a few years ago, I was talking about this poem and saying, he's just playing with these kind of things that are distant, and, well, bouton in French is both button and rosebud, right? And he's playing with that and just kind of exploring the semantic flexibility of the word. But after reading Jahan's article, I was thinking, maybe he actually is discovering something small and specific and personal and embodied. It's close to your body. It's, in the case of the rose, it's alive. And that might actually speak to some deeper sympathies. And the opposite happened to me in kind of others. We've got poems like these from Philippe Soupault. Let me see if I can. Oh, it's because I've got it in, I guess it's because it's in landscape view or something. It's like, something weird. I'll just back it up. Oh, God. Here, I know. So this is kind of like the superficial cosmopolitanism. Soupault, he writes a poem on a cafe in a city. He says, the light catches me at the door. Suddenly I'm soaked in the chatter. 2 Americans, 2. I perceive my incandescent eye at the bottom of the glass. Cheese and dominoes. The waiter interrupts, yanking at my eyes. Behind the glass, I watch the unvarying film. Let's go. They just turned on the electricity. So I think it's maybe it's a movie theater, right, that serves drinks or something, and the waiter interrupts them. So 2 Americans, like, I saw a film, there were Americans in it, that's cosmopolitanism. This cosmopolitanism isn't personal and embodied, it's very distant, it's very observational cosmopolitanism. And on the surface, maybe it feels cosmopolitan. I think through Jahan's lens, we kind of question that. Or this one. Horizon. The whole city has come into my room, the trees disappear, and the evening attaches itself to my fingers. The houses become ocean liners. The noise of the sea has come all the way up to me. In 2 days, we'll arrive in Congo. I've crossed the equator and the Tropic of Capricorn. I know there are innumerable hills out there. Notre Dame hides Gauri Shankar and the Aurora Borealis. Night falls drop by drop. I wait on the hours. Give me that lemonade and the last cigarette. I'm going back to Paris. Jahan, in an interview I read that someone did of him for Modernism, Modernity, the journal that has an online thing, he was talking about in this new book project a criticism of tourism and a kind of touristy poetry. And I think this is an armchair tourist kind of thing. This voice imagines itself to be cosmopolitan, but actually I'm just going to go back to Paris. I don't really want to go to these places. So that made me. His article helped me to reconceive of cosmopolitan in these cases and maybe kind of flip my whole paradigm. I included on the back of that handout, if you want to take a look, Mabel's Arte. I included the first page of that, and you can take a look at it if you like, but after reading Jahan's article, I went through that and I found that the people in this book, which is one long poem, they're always masses, they're always multitudes, they're always full streets and traffic. Those are the other people. But he is me, my hands, my voice. He is embodied, but nobody else ever is. He is specific, nobody else ever is. So that's a cosmopolitanism that lacks, I think, that sympathy. This is not to say that the stuff that I'm interested in these works is, well, let's toss it. But Jahan's article did help me read it more critically and kind of expose something that is sometimes troubling in those works. So, thank you for that, Jahan, and maybe some of what you can see some of those things too, or in your work maybe also changed you. took a new look at it with this article. I'm hoping. Thanks.
Just going over it, or mine's not poetry, so.
No, yeah, but
Okay.
you just.
Michael, do you want the mic?
I'm sorry?
The microphone, or?
No, I think I can project okay. I can be heard in the back. So thanks to Zach for the invitation, thanks to Jahan for visiting us, and thanks to McGillicuddy Humanities Center and Margot and Amy for the work. I just have two small things to say. One is a statement of appreciation for this article, and then one is a question about some of its, two of its concepts. Appreciation is both scholarship, a level of scholarship, and politics. I was not familiar with Jahan's work until reading this. Excuse me. And like Zach said, I mean, it's quite remarkable for me, and I don't read very much any scholarship of literature or poetry, but just the light touch, the light touch and the ease with which it worked through the material, and at the same time entirely compelling. This was quite something, I thought, as a work of scholarship. There's also an argument against fragmented identity politics, which I very much appreciate. And a lot can be said about fragmented identity politics in criticism, I think, that it is self-disintegrating, that it misappropriates and undercuts the impulse of solidarity that was found among identity movements in the 1960s and 1970s, as recently discussed in a new book, Us at Hyder's Mistaken Identity, as well as the legacy of the writers, Caribbean and otherwise, that those people were in turn drawing from. I mean, all of the entire impulse of solidarity is dropped from the contemporary version of this, or at least much of it. Contemporary fragmented identity politics reflects back and reinforces the narcissism of contemporary social media and surveillance capitalism. It's hard to see it as very much a contradiction or a resistance to the system that is determining the order at the present moment. But above all, it's insufficient to contest the threats posed by authoritarian patriarchy, militarized and racialized inequality, and the climate catastrophe that we are facing. I don't see how fragmented identity politics does much to address this. So this critique of narrow identity politics has only become more urgent since Jahan wrote this article 3 years ago. And I'm very appreciative of this, as this issue is quite important to me. My conceptual question, concerns the use of the terms cosmopolitan and solidarity. And I thought I'd just ask a question about teasing them out and see if it's possible, and I can't speak to the poetry, but at the level of concept, if teasing these out might deliver something to us, for us, within the poetry. Now these poets, like ourselves, lived within a state. And a state inherently denotes violence. And that's true if you see the state in a Weberian sense as a liberal state with a monopoly of legitimate use of force. Or if you see a state in the Schmitt sense as a nationalist, authoritarian will to war. For these poets, like for ourselves, the state is an existential condition in which violence is implied and almost always explicit in one form or another. Now, whatever polity may be implied in the term cosmopolitan, it is not the politan of the cosmopolitan, is not the modern state. And thus we find in the article what Jahan calls the contradiction, at least as far as I understood this, between the mirroring of the enemy, the embrace of the enemy, and yet at the same time the killing of the enemy. And we see this as well in the cosmopolitanism of Ernst Jünger. So I'll just detail a little bit here. where during World War I, and actually throughout his entire career, long career, he consistently honored his French enemy. And during the war, he pities also consistently the French families, the French village elders. In Storm of Steel, he spares the life of a British soldier after seeing the photo of the soldier's family, which he called a plea from another world. And he describes confusion when his trench position was defeated. And he writes, in which some were already exchanging cigarettes while others were still butchering each other. Now, Junger speaks of the contradiction precisely within himself. And he says, the state, which relieves us of our responsibility, cannot take away our remorse. Now, what I want to say, and this is really what I have to say today, is that solidarity is something else than this. At least in my view. The state does not relieve one of responsibility in solidarity. The external line between states is relativized by oppositions within a state and across them. With its origins in trade unions and trade union action, which is, I think, the last word, or one of the last words of Jahan's piece, action. With its origins in trade unions, solidarity instead distinguishes not the line between states, but between an oppressor as opposed to the coming together of otherwise disparate peoples. And we see this in the class identities that Jahan also cites. And thus we can see how solidarity can overlap with cosmopolitan. But unlike the cosmopolitan, solidarity is a struggle against an enemy. And it finds meaning not despite the state, but in a social bond defying it. Thanks a lot.